right. We are once again back. If you missed that first little introduction part, we set up that the two of us are discussing Muppet movies tonight, and we're starting with the first Muppet movie, 1979's The Muppet Movie. And it, I guess what I was starting to say before we had our minor technical hiccup is it feels more ambitious than perhaps it even really needed to be. And I think it maybe surprised some people just by virtue of um, instead of just doing a feature length version of the kind of stuff that they do in the TV show, they actually take the Muppets out into real world locations. They do really ambitious setups like Kermit sitting in the swamp or, riding the bicycle, that sort of thing. These are things that, like it seems like someone greenlighting, oh, yeah, you're going to do a Muppet movie? Sure. Doesn't seem obvious necessarily that that's the way you would go, given that the Muppet TV show is all kind of done in their special Muppet set, their theater set, and all of that sort of thing. But it purports to tell, in the very meta way that the Muppets tends to do, the story, the origin story of the Muppets and how they all came to be a cast together. And just like the show, it's filled with various celebrity cameos, and that's kind of the high level thing. So I don't know. What did you? I had in my head. I feel like I've maybe rewatched this more than you have. So in some ways, I wasn't like surprised rewatching it. It's more like an old friend sort of thing. But what was your reaction revisiting it?
So, I mean, you touched on some of the things that were actually my reaction is I had forgotten how many cameos they have.
Hmm.
I had forgotten how much they sing, which wasn't bad. It just wasn't, it was different than I think I wasn't expecting anything, but it just,
Hmm.
there was a lot of songs.
Yeah.
Uh, the puns are just through the roof.
Yeah.
Um, which again, I think I kind of knew, but having only watched it when I was younger, I understood the pun jokes, but watching it as an adult, it's like, wow, that some of
Yeah.
them are clever, some of them aren't, some of them
Yeah.
aren't on
Yeah.
purpose. Yeah.
It's definitely true that this is a movie, especially with the puns and the jokes, that it is the not all of them are winners, but if you didn't like that one, the next one's coming in 3 seconds.
Yep.
So it's that style of comedy for sure.
Yes. So, I mean, it was enjoyable. I didn't remember the plot by any means.
Mm.
So, to your point, it was unexpected that it was this origin story with, I think when I read on Wikipedia, I wrote this down. They called it a pastiche
Mm.
of how they come together.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the way that it's like the framing device at the beginning is the Muppets are holding a screening of, in theory, the movie that we are about to watch. So it's kind of meta already there. But so they are then there saying, we made a movie about how we got together. And so at the beginning of the movie, we're about to watch the movie that's in the movie, and so the Muppets tend to do stuff like that. But I that's the basic idea. Like as far as the plot, you're right that there's not a lot to it. Sorry, I keep jumping on you there.
No, it's fine. I mean,
Yeah. So if anyone's
there isn't a lot there. It's just
yeah.
but it is interesting that all of these characters that we know in the TV show that exist in this Muppet world all exist independently in the real
Mm-hmm.
world.
Yeah.
And, just by design or whatever, Kermit
Mm-hmm.
on his travels happens to encounter all of them.
Well, one of my favorite aspects of the Muppets, which isn't, I think, really very often commented on, but is frequently used for humor, is that in the reality of the Muppets just exist in the normal world and nobody thinks it's weird.
Right.
It's just ordinary. Now, maybe uh, an ordinary person might encounter a Muppet and think that Muppet sure is weird, but they don't think it's weird that they are a Muppet. They just think that's a weird Muppet.
Right.
And so you're right that they're all just kind of in the world doing their thing, and this kind of establishes how they all got together. But so like we begin with Kermit in the swamp, and Dom DeLuise is a Hollywood agent who just is randomly rowing a boat through the swamp, gets lost, and Kermit helps him. But then he's saying, "Oh, well, turns out that Hollywood, in this newspaper that I have right here, says that there's auditions for frogs that want to be rich and famous. You should go
Yeah.
to Hollywood." And Kermit at that time is it. I like how Kermit is such a great character in general, and like he's so obviously he'd been established in the TV show, but I love his attitude, which is to say that it's not even so much that he wants to be rich and famous. Like he kind of has to be sort of prodded to actually leave the swamp and go. But what honestly gets him moving is the idea that like he finds joy in like singing and performing, and that makes other people happy to see it. And so, hey, maybe that would be a good thing to do. It's not so much his own desire for glory or anything like that. But then, he begins a road trip to go to Hollywood and meets all of the other Muppets along the way. But he also meets uh, uh, Charles Durning as Doc Hopper and his assistant, Max, played by Austin Pendleton. Doc Hopper runs a restaurant that serves exclusively fried frog legs, apparently. And he wants Kermit to be like the likeness on the sign, like Kermit is just like all those barbecue signs that have pigs on them going like, yeah, barbecue. And Kermit is horrified by this, never at any point has any interest whatsoever, and yet Doc Hopper becomes absolutely convinced to the point that he is willing to use criminal violence in order to force Kermit to do this, which is kind of amusing. And I frankly really like at the end that we get the big cathartic speech about how, it's like you've got the single-minded pursuit of this. Like he's not even like judging him on the basis of like having a frog leg restaurant. It's more just like, you're letting your dreams get out of control and it's ruining, can't you have a dream and let other people have dreams and that sort of thing. And he basically is like, no, I'm still going to kill you. But we meet all of the other, primary Muppet players. Fozzie is first. And part of what had inspired me to be thinking about the Muppets, prior to suggesting it for this, was the question occurred to me: does Fozzie think that he is a good comedian or not? Like, does Fozzie, the classic bit with Fozzie is that he tells all these groaners, right? Like that's the bit, is that he's like, waka waka, but he is like a stereotype of a bad comedian. But he's kind of like undaunted in that, right? Like he never lets the criticism get him down. But is that because he's given it his all no matter what, or does he just really not absorb that people are reacting that way? Or for that matter, do you think what is the baseline reality of Fozzie in this world? Is he a good comedian or not? What do you think?
He's not. I don't. I would say
Mm-hmm.
because I mean, this is the origin story, and
Yeah.
is clearly failing at his comedic thing. I think what Fozzie represents is sort of the kind of how do you say it, like he's like oblivious in, but in a way that's like endearing.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's kind of how his whole, I mean, even in this movie, like his whole deal is that, they
Mm-hmm.
just, I can't remember the specifics of it, but I just remember like that even in the car ride when they're on their escape, like there's a number of things where you're like, well, you should have known better, right? Like than to do this. And his whole persona is, well, he just doesn't know better,
Yeah.
So
He's kind of like a ray of sunshine is not quite right, but it's just that like he never gives up, right?
right.
He is loyal, perhaps to a fault. His I think the failing actually might not be that he's too loyal. It's that it is just that he's maybe, there are repeated gags over the course of the many movies of him just failing to realize something that is incredibly obvious to the audience in much the same way that he seems to not, like, he realizes here and there, like when he gets heckled by Statler and Waldorf, or in his introductory scene here when he's being the crowd's turning on him, he doesn't seem unaware that that's occurring, right? He doesn't think he's killing it, but at the same time I think he always kind of chalks that up to, oh, tough crowd, as opposed to any kind of analysis of his own performance and whether or not he's any good.
Yeah, I was trying to think of the term I was like thinking of. I mean, he almost embodies like ignorance is bliss, but you're right. It's
Mm-hmm.
not like a pure ignorance.
Yeah. It's
It
it's I think it's a very sort of showbiz attitude, which is to say, you know, maybe I'm not the best in the world, but I'm what I've got, and I'm always going to give it my all. And I'm never going to let the haters get me down, so to speak. Right?
yeah, he very much, yeah. The other thing I was thinking of is the sort of the Monty Python, like always look on the bright side of
Yeah.
life.
Mm-hmm.
He's very much that. Um, he very much, again, he embodies sort of that like stoic virtue of approval and disapproval of others is not what's important.
Mm-hmm.
It's who you are and your own integrity, right? And
Mm-hmm.
what you do. And he sort of in a comedic way embodies that philosophy, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like his integrity is, not in the moral sense of integrity, but in the you do what you say you're going to do. Like he is going to be a comedian, he's going to write these jokes, he's going to tell them, he's going to be loyal to his friends, and he's going to be that to a fault, whether or not it garners approval or disapproval of others.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
I mean, so much of the Muppet cast is all based on, like Hollywood, and not just Hollywood, but just performing arts generally, kind of archetypes, right? And
Yep.
I think Fozzie, especially to Kermit, because his character so much exists as kind of a foil to Kermit, right? Like a friendly foil. Because Kermit's the one that overthinks everything and gets anxiety and gets flustered and frustrated and upset sometimes. But Fozzie's the one that is sometimes frustrating to Kermit because he's just doesn't get it most of the time. But he is also just so able to let everything roll off his back that I think that's kind of inspiring. And he's always got Kermit's, he's always there at Kermit's side, giving him the moral support. And I think he recognizes, like, he is a true friend, even if I maybe, like, I would never tell him that I don't think he's funny because that would feel mean, and he would never say anything mean to me. And yeah, and so I always have, so kind of the original conversation I was having about this, just kind of came up along the lines of imagining Kermit justifying to Piggy why Fozzie still gets, 10 minutes at the start of every performance. It's kind of like, we've been friends for a long time, and he knows how he can. So we had a 10-minute gap while the acts changed the sets behind the curtain, and we need. But in any case, so in the movie, so Kermit meets Fozzie first, and it's Fozzie's car. They got the old Studebaker that they're driving around, and then they meet the Doctor Teeth and the Electric Mayhem, which I was surprised rewatching all of these how much there is of them, like that band, because I sort of always remembered them being present, but I guess they're just like sort of more present than I remembered, because I always kind of think of them as like almost background characters, but they seem to hang out a lot, and and Janice is the one that actually gets to say funny things, um, because she's always the one that's just saying something like weird and tangential or unrelated at the, everyone's talking at once, and then everyone stops, and then she's the one that's going on. It's like, and I just don't think that I would be willing to take my clothes off on camera unless it's tasteful. um, but then, of course, there's then they get to Piggy, which is, of course, the next sort of main cast that we introduce, and we have just right off the bat it is a love at first sight between both Kermit and Piggy mutually, which is, I think, interesting, just because I think over the years sometimes their relationship is depicted as maybe more one-sided. You know what I mean?
Yep.
But at least, as presented in their first meeting, it is instant infatuation from both sides. And they have a shared fantasy love song together, where if we're looking at the poster here, we have Piggy dipping Kermit above the group shot. And uh, I really like the two of them in this because, of course, it's uh, it's the two of them have this relationship, but it's also like Piggy is not selfless. She's still pretty kind of narcissistic, but also like she's very fickle in the moment, but kind of in her heart, she's mostly good there. But sometimes, like she's the one that will beat up a bunch of goons to save Kermit from the evil hypnosis machine. But then as she gets a phone call and it's a new job, and she's like, well, goodbye, and just leaves. But then, of course, we see her on the side of the road suggesting the job didn't work out, and she's just immediately, I'm back. I feel like I'm talking a lot, which I it tends to happen sometimes on the show. But like, essentially, since we're going to talk about all, three movies, we maybe don't need to spend quite so much time on each individual one. But like, what were the highlights of this one for you?
I mean, I don't want to be redundant, but the reality was it sort of reopening my eyes to the singing part of it, like,
Mm-hmm.
and how kind of fun that was, the celebrity cameos, and the jokes, the puns. I
Yeah.
mean, it was those three things are the highlights of this movie for me. I mean,
I
just
mean,
because
that's most of the movie right there, right?
I mean, it is the movie. I mean,
Like
otherwise, yeah,
scene
just
after scene is them having some celebrity. We have Steve Martin as the waiter. We have, Richard Pryor selling balloons at the county fair, and um, Orson Welles at the end.
that one kind of caught me off guard. I had
Yeah.
not remembered that.
I honestly, yeah, I didn't remember it either. Honestly, I'm a little embarrassed. I didn't recognize him rewatching it until I was looking at the list, and it's like, oh God, that's right, it was him. I will say that I think one of the best jokes in the movie is that after all that time, they get to Hollywood and they show up in this guy's office, and he just says, Yeah, no, I like it. So here's our standard Hollywood rich and famous contract. They sign it, and happy ending. There's no additional challenge there. You just like, here, just go ahead and sign it. That's great. I think that's fun.
Was fun.
I agree. I think some of the songs in this one are great. I mean, obviously, it opens with Rainbow Connection, which is just that's an all timer. Like that's a great song. And also moving right along is one that I've kind of like occasionally just runs on repeat in my head. You know, like you get just little songs that you heard when you were a kid that sometimes will just pop in there, and moving right along is one of them. Like anytime it's a traveling song, right? Like it's just moving right along, footloose and fancy free, all of that. But uh, yeah, there's a lot of fun stuff in this. I found it very entertaining to rewatch and to just see how well a lot of the like obviously when you see Kermit riding a bike or something, like when you're trying to say like how well does that effect hold up, right? It's not like it looks the same as if someone did it with elaborate expensive CGI now, right? It doesn't look like that. But of course, Kermit does not look like an actual frog, right? Like he is what he is, a creation of felt and fabric and ping pong balls, right? It's like, so I feel like a lot of those effects look great for what they're trying to do, which is to give this slight surreal but nonetheless impressive quality. And knowing they had no CGI at the time, the best that they would be able to do is paint out some of the wires here and there, but that's about it. But I think there's just a lot of fun stuff here. But I
It
have,
was it was a lot of fun.
yeah.
Yeah. I, I
uh,
think that's kind of the summation of it is that, as much like it it just embodied it, like you said, it was ambitious in what it was trying to do, but it truly embodied like the spirit of the Muppets.
mm-hmm.
And it was interesting to like watch it now. Like this is probably like it wouldn't make sense to watch this if you'd never seen the Muppets, right?
I mean, I think you could certainly enjoy it, but it does in some ways seem designed with the expectation that you know who the characters are already.
Right. But what it's done is it's almost like timeless for people who are aware of the Muppets.
Mm-hmm. And it feels like everybody knows the Muppets. How'd they get their start?
Right, but it also like reintroduces you to them,
Mm-hmm.
and like it because it's so chock full of like again those three things that I talked about, which are staples of the Muppets. It's so full of that it reminds you this is what this is about,
Mm-hmm.
right? And what 43 years later,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, 43 years later, like it still holds up as hey, this is how you get back into this,
Yeah.
right?
Mm-hmm.
So
Which is interesting, just because in a lot of respects, several of the projects since then have all kind of, since there tends to be some big gaps in between. Like some of them feel like they all need to sort of begin with a, all right, so where were we? But so since we're trying to keep it short this time, and we have two more movies to go through, I'll just briefly hit the highlights that The Great Muppet Caper and The Muppets Take Manhattan, I think, are both great movies in the same vein that this one is. I think if anyone rewatches the Muppet movie and enjoys it, then I think you will enjoy those too. I think those two are not quite as iconic in the same way that this one is, but at the same time, they are just filled with great gags. For example, one of the bits in The Great Muppet Caper is that Kermit and Fozzie are identical twin newspaper reporters. And it is a running gag in the movie where many other characters do, in fact, treat them as though they are identical, including Fozzie himself. And Kermit is the only one that seems to have any kind of like it doesn't even make sense sometimes for Fozzie. Like he's literally confusing the two of them as they're standing in front of a mirror. But that's a fun gag. Uh, and but there's a lot to like in both of those, I think. And then the Muppet Christmas Carol was kind of the first one made after there was a gap for a while. It went from 1984 to 1992. And I think Muppet Christmas Carol is fantastic. I would say it's probably my second favorite of all of them, with this first one being still my first favorite, just for the nostalgic charm of it. But Muppet Christmas Carol, also great. But our next movie that we're going to spend a little more time on is Muppet Treasure Island. So, do you want to
Yes.
introduce this one a bit?
So this one I hadn't seen, and it really caught me off guard at how well they weave the true narrative of Treasure Island
Mm-hmm.
in with the Muppets. Right? Like how they it was so clever in how they find the beats,
Mm-hmm.
of the actual story, Jim growing up and being interested in pirates and then getting this map and he has to keep it away from the one-legged man and then he becomes the cabin boy on this voyage to find the treasure and all the beats that come from there on in Treasure Island. It kind of ticks them all off,
Yeah,
but yet weaves Muppets and jokes and songs and like all that stuff into that story. It's very clever
yeah.
in how it does that. So
It's somewhat like with the Muppet Christmas Carol. It's in many respects a relatively straight telling of Treasure Island, with just jokes around all the margins. Like all of the actual main plot beats, for the most part, are played relatively straight. Certainly, all of the stuff with Jim and Long John Silver, who are the two human members of the cast, with of course uh, I'm suddenly blanking on his name, Tim Curry
Tim Curry.
as Long John Silver, um, and also I'm kicking myself because when we were wrapping up with Muppet Movie, I was thinking, wasn't there one of the main Muppet cast that we just didn't even talk about? And it was Gonzo, of course. Like, so Gonzo is he and Rizzo are kind of tag teaming as like Jim's friends that happen to just follow along and experience the whole story along with him for the most part, right? Like I haven't read Treasure Island in a while, but they do not have a direct parallel character, right? They are just shadowing Jim in
No,
his
Jim
story,
Jim goes solo in the
right?
original story.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and so it's very similar to what they do. They're obviously following the successful formula from Muppet Christmas Carol, where Gonzo is Dickens, Charles Dickens. Gosh, I'm having trouble with first names today. He's playing Charles Dickens, but with Rizzo right at his side saying, "What? No, you're not." It's like, "Shut up! I'm doing a movie." And so they're kind of tag teaming in the same way here. And then, of course, we have, Kermit as Captain Smollett. Is that right? Like, I'm trying to remember
Yep.
all the names. I
That's
watched
Captain.
this.
He's Captain Smollett.
Yeah, and then Fozzie is the owner of the ship, Squire Trelawney, and um, then of course Piggy plays Benjamina Gunn once they get to the island itself. But yeah, there's just a lot of fun little gags. I will say, I felt like it started a little bit slow, just coming right off of rewatching Muppet Christmas Carol, but it definitely gets in there. My favorite bits, though, throughout was the running gag of all of the rats on vacation.
Yeah.
Just this bit, if anyone hasn't watched it in a while, when they're all getting aboard the ship, Rizzo has this idea that he's going to sell tickets to all of the other rats getting aboard the ship to tell them it's a cruise. And so there's just this parallel side story throughout that there's all of these rats that were on the ship and treating the whole thing like a cruise destination and having luau's and stuff like that. It's pretty great.
Yeah, it is very funny.
I think that there's also I don't know. I'm just trying to think of what else to say about it other than it's kind of just. I think that um, it doesn't necessarily hit the emotional highs that Muppet Christmas Carol does for me, but it's also telling a different story, right? Muppet Treasure Island is really always supposed to be more of an adventure story than a deep felt heartfelt emotional
Correct.
journey, right? You get a little bit of that with the end. Um, I will say, as far as depictions of Treasure Island, I love Tim Curry in the role, but I'm not sure I necessarily get the idea that he really likes Jim up until the end. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
when the time comes for him to actually turn and actually do things that help Jim, like everything up to that felt like Long John Silver conning him, which he was. But I don't know that I really got the impression that it was real at all until it was time for him to reveal that it was, I guess. I don't know. That's a nitpick, but um, I think it is a perfectly entertaining movie that is not necessarily one of my all-time favorite Muppet movies, but certainly worth watching.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of some of the other highlights from it. I thought the Waldorf and
Statler
who
and
was
Waldorf are the two
Statler
old
and
guys,
Waldorf,
the
the
figureheads.
integration of them as the figureheads on the ship was really
Mm-hmm.
funny.
Yeah. Sam the
Um,
Eagle as Mr. Arrow is pretty good.
yes.
Um,
The way they treat Billy Bones dying
mm,
at the beginning of the story, as opposed to eliminating it when what are the two friends? Gonzo, Rizzo, right? Those
yeah,
are
Gonzo and Rizzo. Yeah.
yeah. And they like look at each other and are like, wait, he died? This is a kids movie.
Yeah.
you know,
Mm-hmm.
like that's I thought that was pretty funny. Like that it rather than eliminate that part of it,
Mm-hmm.
they left the story beat where it was and treated it in a way that like didn't shy away from it.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
I think that there's maybe some of the bits with the native tribe on the island are not the most politically correct these days necessarily, but that's also kind of the fault of the actual original story. Um, but I liked the stuff with Kermit and Piggy over the edge of the cliff. Some of that was pretty good. Kermit having to try to hold her up and all of that good stuff. Um, and yeah, I find Sam the Eagle enormously funny, so I just keep thinking of Sam the Eagle bits. Um, it's not from this movie; it's from the Great Muppet Caper. But the part where he emerges from a door and says, "You are all weirdos," was just like that was an oft quoted line in my household growing up. Uh, but yeah, his whole bit of like, let's trick him off the ship by saying, well, gotta check that the lifeboats are seaworthy, right? And yeah. So well, in order to check properly, you really have to get in it and have it lowered down into the water, and hey, row it around a little bit. To make sure you're checking it properly. And then, of course, the ultimate payoff to the gag is, oh, it actually was not seaworthy, and that's why Long John Silver sinks and is marooned, which is that's a fun bit. But yeah, so I think that it's Muppet Treasure Island fun, not necessarily among the top tier of Muppet movies necessarily, but I it's certainly enjoyable. Um, any other thoughts on that one before we move on?
No, I was trying to remember why we chose it, and I think it maybe
Well,
it was because of the integration of the real life story and the
what
Muppet universe.
we talked about the Muppet Christmas Carol and Muppet Treasure Island as like we should do one of them because they're both kind of in that category. And I think it was that I had more recently watched Muppet Christmas Carol and had not seen Muppet Treasure Island as recently. And I think that might have been why
That's right.
we chose it. But in any case, um, we went from there. The next movie to come out was I'm actually looking at the box office now on Wikipedia. Muppet Treasure Island actually did better than Muppet Christmas Carol. Um, but coming next in 1999 was Muppets from Space, which I think is generally regarded as um, maybe the least of the animated movies.
The
And
Moonraker of the Muppets.
yeah, I think it's got some good bits in it, but a lot of it does just kind of feel I don't know, like very sort of flimsy. Like all of the Muppet movies are kind of lighthearted, but this one just doesn't like at their best. The Muppets are funny partly because they sort of feel like real characters, right? Like they, despite Kermit being literally an object made of cloth and everything that is only brought to life by the performer. It's a performer that we never see, and the illusion is so convincing that we think of Kermit as a character. And this happens over and over again when people are in the presence of someone performing as a Muppet. Everyone's instinct is to treat the Muppet like who you're talking to. There's, you don't look down at the person doing that because there's just the illusion of life given by the performer is so effective, even when it doesn't make any sense. They don't look like a person, right? It's or for that matter, even a real talking animal. But it's just that impressive, and you think of them as real characters. Whereas I think Muppets from Space, there's a bunch of it that just feels a little bit like uh, going through the motions in some ways. And one of the big differences about it, like that was one that I actually hadn't seen before, but I have now. And one of the big things about it is it doesn't have its own original songs. The Muppets occasionally sing, but they're only singing existing like jukebox needle drops, and they're all kind of funky, like uh, Funky Town and Flashlight and all of those sorts of things, which are not bad songs, but musical numbers has been a staple of the Muppet movies and the Muppet Show up to that point, and it felt like the lazier choice, which is probably literally what it was. Is that it's hard to write original songs. Um, but moving on from there is a 12-year gap before we got 2011's The Muppets, which I just absolutely love. I adore that movie. I don't know. Did you see it? Have you seen that one?
I haven't, but I've heard about it. So
Mm-hmm. I like it a lot. I can heartily recommend it. The basic plot of that one is that you have a pair of brothers, one of whom is human, played by Jason Segel, and one of whom is a Muppet named Walter. And the two of them have grown up together, doing everything together, but there's always been just a little bit of tension by the fact that they're brothers, but one of them is a great big human man and the other one is a diminutive Muppet. And so that causes just various, physical complications sometimes. Little Walter's not going out for the football team, so to speak, that sort of thing. But also, Amy Adams and Jason Segel are great in it. Chris Cooper is the bad guy and has an incredible talk singing villain song in it, which I heartily recommend. And the whole premise is that, well, so the premise is getting the Muppets moving again, like activating them again when they've been semi-retired and kind of forgotten, and that's kind of the gag. But I recommend it. It has a bunch of great songs in it, and it's a lot of fun. And then of course Walter shows up again in Muppets Most Wanted. So if you saw Walter in Muppets Most Wanted, he's introduced in the 2011 one. But on that basis, let's go ahead and get to our last uh, movie for this time to talk about the most recent Muppet movie, The Muppets Most Wanted from 2014. Um, I, I think it has some great parts. What did you think?
So it why did we pick this one?
I I think it was just because it was the most recent one, and it's the one that was like,
Right, we needed a modern one, and we didn't want to just do the remake of.
well, also like, well, the Muppets isn't really a remake at all. It is a like reboot, but it doesn't tell the same story at all.
Right. I
But
think we discussed that as like,
yeah.
hey, we don't need to watch the two. Let's watch one that's still a little more different and the most recent.
Well,
Yeah.
it's the most recent. It's the one. It's the last one that's been made, and it's not obvious that they're planning any in the future. Like it seems like now that Disney owns them, everything Muppet related is just going on to Disney Plus, and that seems like it's not clear that that's going to change in any foreseeable future. So it's kind of the last one. I think it makes sense to talk about it in that regard because it is, of course, just a valid question. Is like, are were we weren't trying to pick the best three and say these are the best three. We were trying to pick representative sample, right?
Right. Yeah. No, I was just trying to remind myself
Yeah,
because it's been 2+ months,
yeah,
maybe
yeah.
more since we
More
started
of a
this.
gap than we meant it to be this time, but that's all right.
Yeah, it was. I mean, I actually watched them fairly early on. It was
Mm-hmm.
just this is a weird time in like just in my
Yeah.
job, and we had some
Mm-hmm.
more things than usual at the front end of the fall than we normally would. So,
Mm-hmm.
but either way, I liked like the idea
Mm-hmm.
of the the double, right?
Yeah,
Like,
so the premise in this one is
oh,
that there
sorry.
is
I didn't.
that no, that's all right. I didn't mean to cut you off, but just to the double is that we have Constantine, who's basically a supervillain who happens to look exactly like Kermit except for a mole, and and so he breaks out of prison, and Kermit gets kidnapped, and Constantine takes his place so he can use the Muppets as cover for a crime.
Yes, and he puts a mole on Kermit
Yeah,
because he's
super glues a mole onto Kermit and puts green paint over his own mole, and
yeah,
yeah,
he's very clever. Yeah,
it's remarkably effective, especially when you're dealing with the Muppets and
the
not
Muppet.
like ordinary human beings who would say, "What, Kermit? Why are you suddenly talking with a thick accent?"
Yes, but that part was amusing. Like when
Yeah.
you sort of just like accept that this is happening, and
Mm-hmm.
like watching Kermit like deal with being in the gulag, and watching Constantine interact with the actual Muppets, and and there were two Miss Piggies also because there was like
Well, so there,
there was
yeah,
the regular one, and then there was the guard who like
yeah.
is also kind of a Miss Piggy.
Well, yeah. So you're talking about the other pig Muppet, right?
Yeah, yeah.
That's
Sorry.
another. Well, that's another one of the Muppets that was one of the Muppets introduced in the previous movie. Although it's not clear that she's supposed to literally be the same character, but it is definitely the same Muppet. You know, like the same
Got
physicality.
it. So without having that context, yeah,
Mm,
I didn't catch all that.
yeah.
Um,
Well,
so
it's like the movie does not treat that as relevant. I'm just saying that that Muppet has appeared in the other movie.
got it. So, I I mean, it's fine. Outside of that, like to
Hmm.
your point, there's good moments.
Yeah.
That part is clever, um, and kind of funny, but yet it runs its course fairly quickly.
Yeah. I
Um,
I did still think it was funny every time they do the gag of like they have the wanted poster of Constantine and everyone's going, "Yeah, it's the evil criminal Constantine." And then someone goes and they just put their finger over the mole and they go, "Oh, it's Kermit." And then they take their finger away. "Oh, it's Constantine." And it's just like not not picking up the connection even when they're all that's happening is just briefly covering the mole. I thought that was funny every time, but I agree that's a relatively small part of the movie. I thought there were lots of good bit. I will say there was more Ricky Gervais in it than I kind of wished there were. He's kind of worn a little thin for me over the years.
yeah, and he's fine, but yeah, it was more of a Ricky Gervais movie than I think, like you said, that you wanted it to be.
Yeah.
Um,
Although I will say Constantine's song about like, you know, don't get ambitious because I'm the number one criminal here and you're my number two, and just like the whole song about just like I'm great and you suck. That I liked that one.
it was good. Part where Kermit tries to escape, like behind the poster, like
Mm-hmm.
that looks like Shawshank. That was clever.
Yeah, because
Uh,
there was the whole sequence of escaping in different ways that have been done in different movies, and then Tina Fey's character, who's this prison guard, and says, I have a Netflix keyword searched for prison escape. I have seen every movie escape there's ever been.
yeah,
I did also like the whole gag of Kermit eventually persuading her that he's not Constantine and she doesn't care because that means if she has a real Kermit, then he has to help her put on a prison review performance. I thought that was
yeah.
pretty
So that
funny.
is actually, so going back to like what I said at the first movie,
Hmm.
that is one thing that they did hold true to this. Like uh, the cameos, first of all, before we get to
Hmm.
that, are ridiculous. I mean, Ray Liotta,
Yeah.
Danny Trejo.
Ray
Um,
Liotta hardly even gets to do anything. It feels like he must have had lines that got cut for some reason. Just because, like, he's obviously there, but compared to some of those other prisoner cameos, he doesn't actually get to do or say very much.
yeah, that's true.
I mean, I'm just curious. Found that curious because I was just like, oh, look, it's Ray Liotta.
Yeah,
But yeah, Danny Trejo, and then where's the yeah, Jermaine Clement, Danny Trejo, Tom Hiddleston, Stanley Tucci is one of the prison guards. Josh Groban.
Josh Groban. Yep,
Yeah.
all of them.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so anyway, there's that.
Mm-hmm.
There's the, to your point, the songs
Mm-hmm.
and the way they orchestrate this. Oh, this is why you have to put on the prison review just so that we can get more songs.
Yeah.
Um, and then obviously, I mean, the jokes are the jokes, but
Yeah, I think a couple of the songs are better than others. There's a big closing number with once again a reference because the Muppets Take Manhattan has the song Together Again in it. And so they sort of reprise that in this one, but because it's obvious that they're taking a song from an older movie, it's now Together Again again. I thought that was pretty funny. Because it's still pretty much the same song, which is a good song, but it's kind of just a joke that every time they say again, they add again after it. Together again, again. Um, but yeah, like so there's some funny stuff in it. I think my biggest laugh was actually still the badge size competition between Sam Eagle and Ty Burrell's um, Interpol agent.
yes.
Um, that oh, showing the badge and then the Interpol badge. Oh, that's bigger. It's like, well, this is of course just my travel badge. And then opens his shirt and he's got his whole chest piece is a giant badge, and then wheels in on yeah. So that all that was pretty funny. There's lots of good bits in it, but overall, I think just there's too much of the runtime feels like not funny exposition that is required in order to set up the funny parts. and that kind of takes just too much time to do all that.
Right. When you go back to the original movie and the whole thing is just like a huge riff,
Mm-hmm.
and even Muppets Treasure Island, like it's we know you know the story,
Mm-hmm.
and so we're gonna tell these
Yeah.
jokes like tangentially to what's happening.
I
This
think
has to set things up.
yeah,
Yeah.
I think that may be the issue here is just that the story is too plotty. It requires too much explanation, which feels like it's taking away with from what we actually want. Whereas almost all of the other movies um, are just kind of like the premise and the actual plot of it is very straightforward. And even though you'll have little wrinkles or character moments or just details of how you're getting there, like if we talk about the original Muppet movie, yeah, there's a lot of business with Doc Hopper and all of that and trying to get away from him, but ultimately Kermit wants to assemble the gang and then go to Hollywood and be rich and famous, and he doesn't want to be the Doc Hopper's restaurant mascot. Everything else is just business supporting that. There's not really any other plot to it, right?
Right.
And then I think and then Muppet Christmas Carol and Muppet Treasure Island are more complex, but they're more complex with a story that's known already.
Yep.
Yeah, so I think maybe that was part of the issue with Muppets Most Wanted is it's just it had too much talking necessary for us to understand what's happening, and it takes away from the amount of time devoted to Muppet silliness. But I did also like the Interpol agent showing Sam the Eagle to that ridiculous tiny European car and saying, "Sorry for the extravagant vehicle. Sorry for the extravagant vehicle. It was all they had in the motor pool." So yeah, like there's fun stuff in it. I think it was worth watching. I was glad I watched it, but it's yeah not. I think if I were to rank them, I think the Muppet movie, Muppet Christmas Carol, probably, and then the 2011 The Muppets are probably my top three. And then you know Muppet Caper, Muppets Take Manhattan, Muppet Treasure Island, maybe on like that's the second place tier, and then Muppets from Space and Muppets Most Wanted below that, but without any of them being so bad that I wish I hadn't watched them or anything like that. There's none of that. It's just kind of I like them all, but they're some are better than others. So yeah, anything else you wanted to cover on these or um,
No, I never would have picked this, but I'm
fair enough.
not unhappy that we did watch them. So
All right, great. So I think one of the things that we talked about uh, doing for next time, which we may be able to do a little sooner because it doesn't require us to watch any new movies, is since we started this show originally watching through the AFI's top 100 list, but we finished that a while back and we've done talked about a bunch of movies since then. And so it seemed like maybe it was time to go ahead and revisit the movies we've done since and then maybe talk about like if we were to put all of those movies on that list, if we were to rank them alongside that original 100, where would we go? Where would we put them? And so I think that is what we'll do for our next episode.
yes,
Were you able to see the spreadsheet?
hadn't looked, but I'm sure I
Okay.
can.
Yes. So there are 63 movies that we have done since we did the list.
We watched them fast on the damn list.
Yeah. So, and that is 63 up including the three that we did tonight. So I think that's where we'll be next time. And so in the meantime, everybody, watch good movies.
Watch good movies.